This is George Clooney, the heartthrob. And this is George Clooney, the awkward teen. This is Ariana Grande. And this is Ariana Grande, the middle school version. So, now that you've seen the raw materials that us teachers will be working with, welcome into a grade 6 drama class that I taught a few years ago back in the UK. All the children were sitting in a little circle with their shoes off, and suddenly there was this loud cry of distress. I turned around and I saw one of the boys with another boy's foot in his mouth. For some reason, he had decided it would be a good idea to bite the other boy's toe. "What were you thinking?" I snarled. And I have never seen a child look more perplexed in my life. "I don't know, miss," he said. "I wasn't thinking," he said. "I just felt like it," he said. And actually, from a neurological point of view, that makes perfect sense. According to Stanford Medical, teenagers think differently to adults and children. In fact, they don't really think at all. They feel. And that's because the amygdala, the center of emotions, is hypersensitive in this age group. And that's not to mention hormones, or the fact that their bodies are changing uncontrollably from day to day. David Elkind put it in a nutshell by saying that teens are primarily concerned with themselves. Concerned? I would say obsessed is far more accurate. And because they're still kind of kids, they have this magical thinking where they believe that everybody thinks the same way they do. And this leads to something called the imaginary audience, where they believe that everyone is watching them. Now remember, it's not what you think, and it's not what you know. It's what you feel. So, do you remember when you were that age? Do you remember how much you wanted to fit in? And do you remember how absolutely terrified you were of doing something that was uncool? Now, imagine spending 9 hours a day in front of filtered images and non-stop judgments. Well, according to the Dove campaign, 4 out of 5 girls say that they compare themselves to others on social media, and that they will take an average of 14 images before they select one that they see as possible for a selfie. More alarmingly, 80% of 13-year-olds dislike their natural image that much that they will choose the filters with the highest possible coverage to disguise the way they look. Now, 80% of parents polled say that they have the sex chat with their children. Only 30% have the body image chat. Now, I can show my children Ariana Grande, and I can tell them that that is normal to look that way at their age. And it won't make the slightest difference. Because remember, it's not what you think, and it's not what you know. It's how you feel. And how they feel is that they will never look like that. And how they feel is that everyone is watching them. And how they feel is that everyone thinks that they are not good enough. So it's not surprising that since 2011, there has been a terrifying surge in mental illness in young people who have access to social media. In 2021, emergency department visits for suicide attempts in girls aged 12 to 17 went up by 51% in comparison to 2019 in the USA alone. And you can search any other country and it's similar. Many experts are calling this the second pandemic. Now you might say that's the USA, and you might say that's girls. But I got my grade 8 to have a look on Statista, and they said to me, Miss, the countries with the highest TikTok penetration in January 2023 were the UAE and Saudi Arabia, and 66% of their users are male, and their filters are worse than the girls. So, now imagine that you have autism, or ADHD, or dyslexia, or much higher in the male population, or anger management difficulties. Remember what we said about being cool? Well, now, for no fault of your own, you are the very opposite of cool. You freak out and you scare the other kids. You lose things. You forget things and you let everybody down. You blurt out dumb things and you let the group down. If you had asthma or you had diabetes, people would understand. But the minute you've got SEN, you should just try harder. What's wrong with you? Just grow up. Things are even more tragic when your needs are there because of childhood trauma, which can literally shrink a child's brain. Meanwhile, teachers work with limited data. Some of us literally live in fear of every single health and safety thing, from the teeniest peanut to the smallest asthma trigger. This is not discrimination. But the problem is that some of us stop at the deficits. This is called the deficit approach to inclusion. And it looks something like this. Joey can't garden. There are sharp objects and Joey has autism. Finished. Khalas. Now, sometimes this is laziness. And sometimes it's a lack of training. And sometimes it's fear. After all, these kids can fail so easily. But what if they fail forward? And what if they don't fail at all? And what if they do better than the other children? Angela Novak Amado reported on a program to include disabled adults in a community service project in Minnesota. And she said, Freud has said that love and work are the cornerstone of our humanness. Now, work here does not mean something that you're paid to do, but that sense that we are doing something meaningful, something that gives our life purpose, something that makes a difference for others. How many people with disabilities get to meaningfully know and say, they really needed me? This approach is called the reciprocal approach to inclusion. It means that a student's weaknesses actually become the very things that the other students need the most. Unfortunately, students with SEN are more than twice as likely as the other students to end up in prison. So, I think that prison is a good place to start to see how the reciprocal model can actually make a difference. Pendleton Correctional Facility houses dangerous humans. But it also houses people who have just given up on life. They have never learned to manage their problems in a non-violent way. Meanwhile, the nearby shelter has cats that are incredibly violent too. They will be euthanized if they cannot be rehabilitated. Bad cats. Bad people. Until you put them together. Mrs. Stringer, the shelter manager, said, I've had offenders tell me it was the first time they can remember they were allowing themselves to care for something, to love something. The inmates receiving pets start education programs. They tidy their rooms. They shower. They learn to control their anger. They start thinking of parole so that they can adopt their cats and care for them. In one study, violent incidents dropped by a whopping 300%. Initially, Ms. Stringer was incredibly reluctant to let violent offenders anywhere near animals that had already been abused. She now employs 20 former offenders on a full-time basis. Jordan Erb puts it perfectly. The cats and the inmates, both bound by prison walls and troubled pasts, mend each other day by day. Sadly, for many of our students, school is a cage. They have given up, like so many of these prisoners. They just know that no matter what they do, they are just going to get it wrong. Meet Norman the gnome, who lives under the carpet in the pre-K classroom. Norman sends the children messages, gifts, seeds, drawings, and little puzzles to solve. Naturally, they write back. Well, Norman is actually a group of at-risk children in secondary. Since the children became Normans, their attendance has improved. In fact, they even come to school early so that the little ones don't see Norman sneaking under the carpet to put the gifts inside. One of my Normans used to melt down very explosively. And I would run out when I heard him and scream, and I'd have seeds or a potato. And I would yell, Norman, what are you doing? This potato is dying. You need to plant it right now before it dies. You see, the same sensory stimulation that was destroying this poor child was also calmed down by gardening. No one grew potatoes like this little boy grew potatoes. Once he'd calmed down, we could discuss his triggers, get him back into the lesson, catch up his learning. Previously, it would have been a write-off. He would have been so upset, we would have had to send him home. Dad would have needed to take time off work, come and fetch him. Now, he had a good deed. He caught up his learning. He had a good day. And all because the little kids needed him. When 200 animals at the Qatar Animal Welfare Society needed help, our 6th grade global social leaders stepped up with written posters and homemade toys. They were featured in the Peninsula newspaper, and they influenced the grade 10s to join them. You can see the high quality of student work from both genders. And it's also impossible to see which children have SEN and which students don't. The animals needed them. We saw this once again with our partnership for Education Above All, an organization that educates over 10 million children across the world, but spends no money on advertising, as all funds go directly to the beneficiaries. Our children do not have a lot of money, but they speak multiple languages. By designing promotional materials in Hindi, Polish, French, German, and Spanish, they were able to reach an additional 4,300 people in our community. Now, some of these people, some of our children, were reluctant writers, and they were absolutely terrified of writing to real audience. But they stepped up because the children needed them. Some of our SEN children suffer from procrastination, and I think some of you, especially the teachers in the room, know that screen time, how many of you struggle with screen time as being a big issue when you've got young people and students, okay? Could we leverage our screen time as a strength? Well, we did this with our students. We had a group of 12 to 15-year-old boys, and many of them had SEN needs. They actually monetized their own Roblox platform. And they used their Roblox platform to raise funds for the World Food Program. Their efforts were recognized by the global social leaders and the Lego Foundation. And they were one of 5 schools across the world to win a scholarship program, which they used to design a humanitarian open team street mapping program, which saved lives in Madagascar and the Philippines, as well as other countries in the world. So once again, their hyperactivity and their addiction to screens, in this case, actually saved lives. Again, they also partnered with Education Above All to raise 100,000 Qatari rial by playing football because other children needed them. So just another example of where being needed allowed children to turn a weakness into a strength. So the grade 6s discovered that we were discriminating against certain people in our communities because they were illiterate and uneducated. And when they brought that to our attention, we obviously thought we have to do something about that. So our students decided to say sorry by planting vegetables and herbs for the people we were discriminating against. only we were doing it wrong. And these uneducated people not only taught the founders of our medical garden how to grow our plants more productively, they also taught us how to grow moringa, which actually has 7 times more vitamin C than oranges. The pre-K students, who by the way are also illiterate, saved our lemons from the bugs because they were short enough to see underneath the leaves where the bugs were hiding. So no longer did we sort of like, oh, they need us. We needed them. The Business Times of India says it best. The greatest need of man is to be needed. Even if a single person needs you, it gives you significance. A child needs you as a mother. That's enough to live for. A man needs you as a wife, and that's enough to live for. A friend needs you. Without you there, somebody will miss you. Somebody will feel lonely. That's enough for you to feel meaningful. So, who needs you right now? Who needs you to show them that the world will be an emptier place without them? That they have a purpose and a place in this messy thing called life? Who needs to hear those life-changing words? I need you. Thank you.